thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. My name is Sofia Sahmendi, and I'm the co-founder of Skills for Impact, and I will be hosting the conversation today. And we're going to have a special guest, Leo Raymond, today, who will be joining this conversation and sharing his thoughts and understanding with us how to actually move towards true innovation without leaving any creation of value behind. So thank you everyone for being here. As we start today, I'd like to just share a question that could help us understand where we're standing today. So I'm just going to quickly introduce the topic, and then we're going to kick off with a poll. So as I was saying, I'm the co-founder of Skills for Impact. Skills for Impact is an academy that helps people and organizations upgrade their skills and knowledge in sustainability and climate action. We are combining technology, community wisdom, and actionable knowledge to create different learning experiences. But today, as I was saying, we're going to have a conversation, and we want you to be part of it. So I'm going to share just a Zoom poll that you'll find in anytime in the settings. All right. So the question is what you see in screen. Do you think that every department in your business views sustainability goals and objectives as a shared responsibility? Where do you stand in this matter? I'll give you a few seconds so we can get as many answers as we can.
Oh, you've gone on mute. I can't hear you, Sophia.
Yes, thank you, Leo. I was saying that we have 66% of respondents so far. So let's give it a few more seconds, and then we can share the results. And then, Leo, I can properly introduce you to this conversation, so you help me reflect on the answers. I have a spoiler here because I'm looking at it, and it's quite interesting. There's a lot of different opinions. All right. Just a few more seconds until we have the last participants voting. Great, I'm gonna finish up. So let's see what people think about this specific question. So where do we stand in terms of sharing the responsibility of the sustainability efforts? As you can see, the majority, almost 60%, said that there's an undue reliance on the sustainability team to deliver. And then we have a 21% that's not sure. And then we also have a lucky 21% that says that the effort and responsibility is shared. Leo, what do you think about that? Where do you stand in terms of this question?
Well, I'm pleased, first of all, that the answer is what it is, because it reinforces our own survey with the same answer. We had like 61%, I think, saying no. So that's good, because otherwise it might be challenging. And I think the feeling we had from our survey and the work that we've been doing is that it's not felt to be significantly enough of a shared responsibility across different functions. I think I've seen some work that looked at the literacy levels of different departments in a business. There's the climate literacy, sustainability literacy, and there's such a distribution really of understanding. It saddened me when I first saw this data, because I've come from a marketing background, and the marketing people were at the back of the train, if you know what I mean. This is 2 years ago, so yeah, I'm not surprised. So.
I should say I'm not surprised. I do feel that I've heard this many times, how the sustainability champion is trying to get everyone on board, and that sometimes it doesn't feel that they have enough traction or enough influence, and they struggle, right, to get everyone aligned with this. And as I was saying, I'm not surprised, because this is a question that has already been asked specifically in a survey that we're going to be sharing today, which is a survey that was run by Eden Lab. So Eden Lab is an innovation and consulting firm where Leo is the co-founder and the CEO. So today we're going to be talking about this and the results that survey showed, which among others was also very surprising for me, because it mentioned that 43% of more money is spent in sustainability reporting than in true sustainability or sustainability action. So this is a little bit the context where we're standing today. At least that's the survey that was run. And that's why we also wanted to have Leo today, right? To discuss on this matter, to understand what is it required to move towards true sustainability. Where does reporting sit in that context? And I'm very, very grateful for having you here, Leo. So thank you very much. If you'd like to, thank you very much. So to get started, I'd like to talk about a little bit about the context. So let's talk about what we call the transition to a post-carbon economy. What do you think? How does this look like, and what do you think that it's the effects? How does affects business today?
It's such a huge question. The first thing I'm going to say is that for those of you who really understand sustainability deeply, we should be saying transition to a post-fossil carbon economy, because the future will involve some aspects of carbon and things that we need and make. My feeling is that, by the way, and that's why I call it the great transition, is that the majority of my peers, the majority of our friends and colleagues, haven't really understood the scale of what's happening. And I don't mean the scale of forthcoming spiraling challenges to biodiversity or to the weather or whatever it might be. I'm talking really about the scale of the transition that's happening, how big it is. So what I mean by that is the industrial shift that's going on, the societal shift that's going to happen, the business shift that's going to happen. And it seems to me that you could say the transition is already happening everywhere, but not many people have really spotted it properly. I'm stealing that quote by William Gibson that everybody knows, the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. I think the transition is here, but it's not evenly distributed.
I like that quote. And where do you see the evidence of that transition being here?
So I guess, it's easy to say things like the energy industry is doing an enormous change right now. And the level of change that's due to come is even bigger. There may be people working in energy businesses on this call, and perhaps you can chip in later, or you can comment later in the call. But I have this data for the UK, my home market, more than I have for Spain, but I think direction will be the same. It amazes me that apparently the Chinese government installed as much domestic solar power last year, in 1 year, as the whole of the UK uses in 1 year. I think it's 55 gigawatts of energy. Imagine the scale of that. I don't know whether Spain is similar, probably not far off, perhaps a bit more. But it's unbelievable, absolutely huge. And the amount of energy we need to power our cities going forward the next 10 years is the same. It's 10 times what we currently have. And those pylons, I don't know what you call them in Spain, but the transmission lines for electricity from kind of out in the sea or on land for wind power to the cities have to be 10 times what they are today. So even in just one narrow field, and the big one, admittedly, of energy, there's an enormous shift happening, I see it in a much more simple way. When I'm getting food from our supermarket, our local store, when I begin to notice very subtle changes in packaging. So, for example, I bought some blueberries, those blueberries that you get for breakfast last weekend, and the packaging top had turned from plastic to paper. It's a very tiny thing, but it's a very tiny important thing, because an ocean is made of tiny droplets, right? So I feel like the transition is subtle, but it's happening. I see it in coffee shops, on the A boards, the boards outside coffee shops in London and New York, where you begin to see that people are beginning to reference the sourcing of the coffee and the carbon dioxide and emissions and so on. So I feel in a way desperately sad and concerned about the pace of change, but I also see that it's really, 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 really ramping up, but it's still small, but it's growing fast. I'll leave you with one stat and then I'll stop talking, but there was some research done. Again, it's UK centric, but it'll be the same in Spain, directionally the same in Spain. And across Europe, really, which is that the net zero economy, so the economy of companies and businesses and organizations involved in solar, for example, or in waste management or water retention, for example, is growing at 9% year on year. 9. At the same time, the Eurozone was something like 0.1. So the net zero economy if you can imagine that, it's growing like 90, was last year growing 90 times faster than the regular economy. But if I go out to a room full of people from any discipline at a conference and I ask them who knows that, I might get 2 or 3 hands.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is this amazing moment of like, something is happening. It's still quite small. It's going to be huge, and people haven't realized it yet.
Absolutely. And many of these phenomena, when they happen, they have this like tipping point. So they start like progressively showing evidences of change, and then something happens, it reaches this threshold when it becomes the new normal. So the new business as usual would be what now is the business as unusual, right? So this context represents a challenge and opportunity for business, right? So it's like regardless the industry where you're at, you might be more or less affected. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and specifically how you talk about the thrivers and the zombies. All right, so you have these like 2 categories that you've used before to kind of like explain how companies do actually stand in terms of this transition, and what can they do, and what makes the difference. So can you share a little bit what are the zombies that you called and the thrivers?
Yeah, thank you. That's Sophia. That's really good. So I really like the idea of zombie companies. And what I mean by zombie companies is they are already dead, but they don't know it. So they act like they're alive, but really they're dead. And what I mean by that is they're dead in the medium term, like on hopefully like a 10-year horizon, not necessarily a 5-year horizon. And what I mean by that is their way of operating, the way they make money, the fact that they don't build the costs of the externalities that they're, the nature that they're destroying, or the impact they're having on the environment or their workforce or their customers into their model is kind of an old way of thinking about how business actually is actually working and works in the modern world, and how it's going to work in the rest of the 21st century. So they're zombies, and they can look very profitable. I guess a fossil fuel company, a Shell or an Exxon or whatever, is a zombie. It looks alive and it's busy thriving and making money. But on the long-term horizon, in its current form, it's definitely dead. But it's the question of whether you feel like that's the sort of place you want to work in, and how happy you are working like that. The contrast is that thrivers, I think, is the label. We were trying to find thrivers is not as good a label as zombies, but we'll come up with another one maybe. But thrivers is really supposed to represent those businesses that have, or organizations that have figured out what the future looks like, that have understood what's happening. And there's not so many of those, and they're still usually smaller, but they're the ones that will be able to inherit and disrupt markets in the coming years ahead. And there are lots of people inside companies of all kinds, be they zombies, be they somewhere in between, which is the majority and all the thrivers. There are people in every company who are those progressive leaders and are prepared and are seeing what's happening and are ready to make the change. That's the clients of Eden Lab typically, is the more progressive change agents in different disciplines in the company, but who have seen what's coming. But again, I find it amazing sometimes, I guess, because we look at this stuff all the time. We think about it hard. We really see where the world is going, but others don't. I'll tell you a story as an example to make it less abstract of the difference between thriving and zombies. We were working with a really big, very famous consumer packaged goods company, FMCG business, right? In the home care, which is like laundry detergent space. And some of the people working in the R&D department that were working with us were thinking about, they sell a lot of product into Asia, into the subcontinent of Asia. And they hadn't really been thinking at all about the fact that there's going to be significant water shortage in the next 10 years and beyond. Like, water stress is already happening. It's forecast to get a lot worse. Now, if you happen to be in the detergent business, water is a big part of how you make it, but also how it's used by your customers. And they didn't have a work stream on like, what's your plan for like what you do for a business in a water stressed world, which is maybe 10 years away. Who knows how far away it is? Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 5. But they had no work stream on it. And they're a major, successful, intelligent multinational business. That to me is like zombie-like behavior, even potentially in a relatively progressive business. And it's not that information is hard to come by. I mean, it came from, I think, the World Resources Institute or the World Economic Forum. There are charts all over the internet of water shortage forecasts. So what is it that leads certain people to not think about like the true context in which they're going to be operating within their own careers, most cases, right? Unless you're like 60 or 58 or something, I don't know, but like, most likely you'll be working in that world. And you probably certainly have family, friends, communities, children living in that world. It's quite strange that, I guess it's that humans have, I think it's a behavioral psychological trait called status quo bias. So we find it easier to live in the present, I think, than really think well about the future. And I think it's called this hyperbolic discounting. We're not good at thinking ahead necessarily.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why.
This reminds me of two things. So the first one is that I forgot to properly introduce you. So I'm going to say that we are hearing today to Leo Raymond. You are not only a writer, a speaker, but mostly I'd say you are a disruptive thinker. There's this quote that I really like. It's about how you are passionate about helping people make smart decisions, like questioning their limiting constraints, right? So this is, I was reminded of this when you just mentioned this bias that we might have that might not let us look to midterm. And I wanted to ask you, Leo, like how do you envision that big companies can actually change from this like zombie mode towards the thrivers? Like who is responsible for this mind change or like swift? Is that the role of the sustainability champion? Is that the role of the directors, the owners? How do you see that happening? And let's start talking a little bit about that, like the role of the sustainability champion.
Yeah, right. It's a good question. I mean, I think the sustainability champion is the facilitator and the knowledge expert, but I'm not sure they're necessarily, in my experience, sufficiently empowered to really set direction properly and set the pace of change. If they're lucky and they work in a good modern contemporary business that understands what's happening, they'll be consulted and involved and help shape strategy. But quite often they're in a deep negotiation with the legacy system in the business, right? Between what needs to change and what needs to come next. And what I see is so much, and not just me, but others, is it's very easy for a board or a chief executive or a C-suite or a leadership of a business to push the sustainability function into, you could call it, there's a phrase, I think it's an English phrase called busy work. Do you know busy work? It's like the appearance of being busy, but how much impact are you really having? And so it's easy in a way for the board to push sustainability towards risk assessment, compliance, reporting, and those things aren't not important. They have a value. But it seems to me, and the IBM research has shown, and our own research has shown, that what's actually happening is a distraction from what they should be doing or what they could be doing to really drive the company into it, or the business or the organization into a brighter future. I'll come back to the role of, I know the focus is on the role of a sustainability officer, but there's one thing I do want to land, which is that I really worry. I worry for my community and my children and my family, as well as everyone else's and all of yours on this call. I worry significantly about a world in which, whilst things are accelerating and spiraling worse, we're building ever more high precision rear view mirrors. You know, the mirror when you're driving in a car that looks back? Like, that's what so much focus is on, doing that. It's a bit like we're spending all our time figuring out how big is the hole that we find ourselves in, and much less time building ladders to get out of it. And that has to change. It's my theory is that it will change, and it will change perhaps slower than we hope and perhaps faster than we hope, depending on external events. Like a couple of really bad harvests on 3 continents at the same time and no rice in your supermarket, or significant disruption to 4 or 5 big cities in the West that people really care about. I know it sounds unjust, but I think that's a factor. Could lead to quite a significant shift in people's attitudes towards this. But anyway, I'm getting distracted from the core theme of the role of the sustainability officer, I think.
Yes, I know. I mean, I think what you're saying is also a pain that I've heard many times from sustainability leaders. struggling for this. So it's like they're struggling because I think this is the idea is that they are the main responsibles for this. And it comes to a point where if you want to create significant change, there has to be an understanding that this has to be a shared responsibility, right? So that connects me back to the survey that we did when we first started this meeting. Like 60% of the people that are listening to us today also believe and they feel that within their organization, this has not been understood as a shared responsibility. And when we're talking about the great transitions and the things that we want to see happen and that need to happen, like the example that you had just mentioned from the water-based company, I can only think that it's much more required, and there's a role that the innovation has to play. And we cannot expect sustainability champion to be an innovation also guru, right? So it's like it has to be this collaboration within other departments of the company, but then specifically, I think there's a role that has to do with innovation, right? So it's also like something I wanted to bring to the table, and the name of this talk is like true sustainability requires innovation, and it requires to go beyond reporting. So like to leverage reporting and compliance efforts, but to actually clarify this idea that the sustainability lead or responsible person wants to create value. So it's also something that keeps me awake at night. It's like, how do we create significant and lasting value that is sustainable, that leverages reporting, but that also helps other departments understand what's their role, right? So when it comes to innovation, I'd like to know, because you're an expert on this matter, like how do you think they should be talking, like sustainability, innovation, to actually progress and accelerate this change?
Yeah, I understand. I always think that the sustainability people have the agenda, but they don't have the money, typically. And other departments have the money, but don't have the agenda, but might be persuaded. And that's, by the way, why at Eden Lab, we've always chosen to work with like a commercial or innovation role and sustainability together. Often others as well, but we find that the only way to succeed is to convene those collectives to work on problems together. Well, specifically about innovation, I think it's interesting, and it's, of course, it's not a uniform general truth, but as a whole, it would be probably true that most people working in innovation roles in companies don't know what CSRD is, don't know what TCFD is or TCND is, don't know what SBTI is. You know, they don't know the technicalities of what's going on around sustainability and dealing with climate mitigation and adaptation, for example, and the metrics that go with it. Some will, but generally not. I often ask a question at conferences that I speak at where I say, hands up if you know what scope 1, 2, and 3 are. And it's not because I care about whether they know what's the difference between scope 1 and scope 2, and it's hard to articulate it even if you do know it sometimes. But it's more like an indicator of levels of fluency. And what I find is less than 10% of hands go up in every single discipline. And that's a bit like if you went to a conference 20 years ago and said, who knows what HTML is? And if no hands went up, you were like, guys, you don't know what the internet is, you're dead. But you haven't figured out what's coming next. So to me, that's kind of similar. But when it comes to innovation and sustainability people, whilst the innovation guys don't know much about the technicalities of sustainability and perhaps don't understand the nuances of it, or not as deeply, the sustainability people don't actually really understand deeply the nature of how to actually go about the process of innovation, how to figure out how you might find ways of doing small scale prototypes and prototypes to test ideas out. They're not familiar with lean and agile as ways of working necessarily. They haven't done MVPs. They don't think in that kind of mindset, and that I think is a limiting behavior in terms of getting sustainability successfully to the table and taken more seriously. Have we lost Sophia, by the way? Did she vanish? She might have done. Habo, are you there? Maybe we'll carry on. So yeah, so I think that's really a really crucial challenge, and I think it's been true in other disciplines previously, but sustainability is slowly moving out of the preserve of just one discipline in the organization into other areas. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember there was a time when there was a new media function or a new media department. Does anyone remember that? And then there was a chief digital officer, and they still might have some of those, but eventually everything became digital, and that role, that function was spread across the entire organization. My contention is that we will see the same with sustainability in businesses, or whatever it ends up being called, a bit like no one calls it new media anymore. In fact, it's absolutely crucial that does happen, that everyone takes that responsibility on. And I've seen in London, certainly, I don't know whether you're experiencing it, the creation, for example, of hybrid roles that sit between finance and sustainability, which is like a sustainability ops role to do reporting at scale. Have you seen that? That seems to be kind of happening on a more common basis at the moment. So that's going on.
Hi, Leo. Yeah, no, I have this last thing that you've mentioned. I wasn't aware of, or I haven't seen it, but I do agree on what you shared, like the need of interdepartmental communication and how it actually reflects on like very easy things. Like you were just saying, like people that are working for innovation might not be really aware of what scope 1, 2, 3 means. And they might not necessarily have to know that specific concept, but it's just this like general idea. So moving towards like practical examples, like, because we've kind of like talked about like what should not be happening or how this sometimes like it's not truly working. But do you know, or can you share some examples of like true innovations that have created lasting value and that are helping companies stop looking to the rear view mirror that you were mentioning and like more like forward looking? And one add-on question, like my personal opinion is that if you're not improving something, I don't believe that should be considered like true innovation. Like within the context that we're actually facing now, unless innovation is sustainable by default, I don't think we should be calling them innovation. So it's like, it might be something new, something that is creative, but it's like, are you really innovating if you're not truly improving something that it's an actual problem that we, so those two questions.
Maybe the last one first, but there's a real innovation is a very fat word, has many meanings, doesn't it? I'm working with a very large European-based yogurt and dairy company. And sometimes innovation for them is just changing the flavor and the packaging, which is new, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a sort of fundamental shift in their approach to making a business that works for 21st century.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Other times that they might be doing a lot of work in bringing regenerative farming into the supply chain to try and reduce methane emissions across the production of dairy. And I guess that is more fundamental innovation in a way, but maybe not as fundamental as starting to grow milk proteins in a giant fermenter to have almost bypass the cow entirely in the creation of dairy. Now, whether or not that's what you want, and whether you worry about the processedness of how ultra processed that would be, that's another story. But there's a great difference in the level of the kind of innovation we're talking about there. The work that we've done, I'll tell you some stories. I think maybe I can find 2 good stories to tell you as examples of what's possible. Both of these are characterized by the central team that engages with us when we work with clients will involve a sustainability professional, an R&D or science and technology person, often a marketing person, maybe a P&L owner, like a commercial leader as well, working with us in concert. And that's already a really powerful start point. We were working with Unilever of this team called Clean Future. I don't know if you've heard of Clean Future. They're a really interesting team, a kind of cross-functional team that's trying to work out what is a cleaner future for home care. And the work with them was to work out how, given that they've got very strict net zero targets, how do we accelerate towards achieving those? How do we hit their sustainability goals effectively? And one of the tools that we use that, if you haven't tried, is worth doing, we find it very effective, is to do, we call it post-carbon futures, but it's to create a vision of the world in 2040, for example, and not like a perfect, overly meticulous military planner doing scenarios kind of thing. That's too complicated. We tend to do more like, these are big vectors that are going to define the future. And there might be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, like water shortage and what that might mean for lifestyles in Asia. And then we bring that together and we take the team, a connected team of different disciplines through that process of embedding themselves in that time frame, thinking about what the world is like in 2040, really thinking about it, really empathizing with what it will be like to be there. Not because we think we're brilliant clairvoyants or, you know, prophets that can spot the future. Who knows what's going to happen? But the process of planning for it and the process of removing the limiting assumptions of today, the barriers of your existing assumptions of today, is the thing that's valuable. And in their case, we were working to explore how could you clean laundry, you know, get clean clothes without using hydrocarbons based on oil as the basis for the production of detergents that melt the dirt. And already this technology exists, but it's not scaled. You can use probiotics to eat dirt instead. So you're shifting from a chemistry model to a biology model. You know, it's much more inspiring biomimicry, I think, really. And that was a big breakthrough for them. So they went to the future and thought about the reality of the challenges that we would have. They came back with biology as a part of the solution. And that lets them think about, do they need to build a biology capability into what is essentially a chemistry business, chemistry company? There's a good example of an innovation story, and they're now working on how that would manifest in the real world. I don't think that's particularly surprising. It's a great product, actually. It's in Chile, and I think it's been exported more broadly. It's a detergent called Quix, Quix, that effectively is a bio-based detergent, not a petrochemical carbon-based detergent. And what's even better about it is that when they tested it, not only did it clean dirt in a really smart way, in a really clean way, it's also softer on your hands. So it's the perfect story, right? It's like, not only is it effective, it's actually a better user experience when you took the carbon out. I wish I had 1,000 stories like that. I only have a couple, but that to me a really good example of what you can do. Another one, which is not something I've worked on, but it's a climate tech company that I'm really very close to and very inspired by. And I know the founder, who's a very, very, very smart individual. The firm is called Deep Green Technologies. I don't think you'll have heard of it. It recently raised $100 million of funding from a renewable energy company called Octopus, which is a big renewable energy business over here. What they do, which is, it's just a really brilliant example of human ingenuity. That's what I like about it, like human ingenuity. When I tell this story in conferences, I see the room, I see their eyes widen and they sort of smile, which is a very rare thing in the sustainability conversation, right? So what the story is that they have discovered that what they can do is take the heat emerging from servers, from computing, right? They use that heat to heat the water in public swimming pools, in baths, you know, municipal baths.
Wow.
And that's brilliant for 2 reasons, or 3 or 4 reasons, really. One is the major cost of running a data center is cooling. About 50% of the operating cost of a data center is cooling. And now that's free from the fact that they've just got water from the pool coming in the system and being heated up. The local authority, the municipality, gets, I think it's like 100,000 euros a year's worth of free heating. So that saves them money. It means they can stay open. It means that local elderly people can go swimming in the warmth. It means the waste isn't wasted, the heat isn't wasted. It's a really brilliant example of like a regenerative technology-based climate innovation solution. And I think what we need to find is like 400 versions of that we can talk about and share with the company and share with the CEO and share with the colleagues and bring to conferences. And I think that's when you can begin to get, frankly, excited about the magnetic pull of a better future rather than terrified, despondent, and depressed about something spiraling out of control.
Absolutely. 2 of the 3 examples that you shared have something in common, which is like putting nature at the center. And what happens when you start, let's say, working in favor with nature, right? It's like these. So that also comes with add-on benefits that weren't unplanned. This like net stakeholder positive effect on the most recent example. So I think that's also like a very important insight. It's like in many ways, I feel that to actually create sustainable value, there's one side of it that looks like, let's go back to basics. Let's understand how was it, or how could it be if we remove humans, right, from like the center of the picture. So I thank you very much for sharing that. I've heard many examples before, and sometimes, I mean, they sound as easy as just letting nature be, right? When we're talking about regeneration, we're just talking about also like understanding that we're part of a complex system that has already so many rules and ways of functioning that it's even beneficial not to even interfere. So how do we put back nature in the center? And specifically in regards of the products that the companies are manufacturing. So I think those are two of the things I liked about your examples very much.
I came across an amazing quotation yesterday, and I can probably put the source in the chat if you want to listen to the podcast, but it was something like, nature has spent billions of years writing the book on carbon chemistry. Now it's time for humans to read it. So there is interesting, I really thought that was a really nice articulation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time, and I don't want to be the only one asking questions around here. So I'm going to just ask the crowd today to write their questions in the chat. In the meantime, I do have one more question prepared, but I'd like to open the floor. So feel free to send over some questions, and we're going to be like reviewing them. In between, Leo, what do you think is that topic that no one is talking about that it might be comfortable, but that we should be addressing?
I think, I often use this question myself on participants in these sorts of things, and I think it's powerful because it gets you to talk about what hasn't been discussed. And maybe we'll come back at the end and see what, after the questions or debates that we have, what else is talked about. But maybe this might be a very UK-centric one. I wasn't planning to answer it this way, but it's come to mind today. It's on my mind at the moment. Some people estimate that 1 billion people are going to move in the next 20, 30 years as the weather gets too hot to live around the equator. You probably heard that, right? 1 billion people potentially have to move where they live into other parts of the world. And already in Europe, there's so much polarization and division around what, frankly, in the long term, is a tiny trickle of immigration. Tiny trickle of immigration. And already it's like leading to enormous right-wing swings in politics and society across France and Germany and the UK. I don't know about Spain. It stuns me, it stuns me. And when you think about the fact that in the UK, we worry a lot about, the population worries a lot about people crossing the channel in boats. It's going to be like 1,000 times that in the nearest future, or the medium-term future. Maybe 10,000 times. I don't know the exact scale. What's that really going to mean for our societies and how we have to adapt? And how do we actually begin to get people to prepare and think now about the upside? It's hard to imagine because everyone always frames it within a negative. Pressure on services, pressure on government, pressure on welfare and so on. But there are also upsides. And who's making that case? Who's telling that story? Who's exploring that? I guess it's probably considered to be death for a politician today. But it's something which we collectively, on this call, and everyone in my street, and everyone in my office, and wherever else, we're going to be having to work out some smart solutions to that challenge in the next 10, 20 years. And hardly anyone's talking about it. Am I right? Audience, what do you think?
I was actually wondering the same. It's an open question. I don't think it's been solved yet. It's a challenge that I was trying to picture in my mind. What does that mean in terms of like physical space? And it's so big. Sometimes it's what you were saying. Like it's hard to actually understand the real scale that it's gonna happen. And as you were saying, it's one of the challenges that should be properly addressed. It's like the water shortage that we were talking about. But it just, sometimes I feel that they're so massive, or they're like so complex because there are many parts that might be tricky. Like, where do you start? So yeah, maybe what you were saying, like highlighting some samples of companies that are, like taking steps towards finding an upside to it and how to actually create value out of it would be a good starting point. Like I'm gonna review the chat. So we do have one question from Nicolas. So Nico says, we get lost in the details in this work. What is an example of an organization that has done particularly well in clearly painting the picture of the brighter future that they are working towards? I'm gonna rephrase the question. So like he's asking for a specific example of an organization that is painting the picture of what a brighter future looks like.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And in a way that we can all collectively share in and understand. Because I think that's a good question. I think there have been examples of organizations or companies or businesses in the past that were able to establish like a vision for the future that we could all buy into, like a better future where we would all feel inspired by it. I guess we've seen quite a lot of that from, at least in the last 15, 20 years, from technology companies, haven't we? That sort of Apple was trying to articulate what it might be like to be creative with a piece of hardware in your hand. It's a small version, but that could be done. Or sometimes political organizations are able to establish a common vision for a better future and you all vote for them. It's harder to see for me in the sustainability world. There are lots of obvious examples that people talk about all the time, like Patagonia and so on. But my problem with that is it's the only reference example anyone can ever mention. And we need to have, tenfold that amount. I'll give you an example I wasn't thinking about. I would never have mentioned until I came across someone who was working with them yesterday. You all know B Lab, right? The guys that do the B Corp certification. Everyone knows about that. And it's been successful.
I spent a few years working for them, so I do know them very well.
And I guess they've been pretty successful in many ways in establishing kind of common baseline, but it's been criticized and attacked a bit lately for having a bunch of companies certified that perhaps were not as transparent or as committed as one would hope to the principles of B Corp. But I had a conversation with someone yesterday who's been working with the B Lab team, I guess the central executive team of that business, and about the transition that they are trying to make from being not just a certification business that sets a kind of set of common standards for what good looks like, but that they really will be trying to work to have a impact on whole systems now. So not just how do I certify company X or company Y against a set of positive criteria, but what would it take to change the entire food system to almost be like a B Corp system? I think that's an example of a vision that is necessary and is an interesting one. Like that, we have to understand that we can't solve it in isolation and we can't solve it alone. Everyone knows that, but really proving examples of bringing it together at a system level are quite challenging. One of my clients actually might be a good reference here. So we have, they're in Spain too. You may have heard of a rail ticketing platform, train ticketing platform called the Train Line. Do you know this guy? Have you heard of the Train Line? I think they're big in Spain. They've been building a collective or a consortium of companies and operators across the transport ecosystem under the banner or the name of this movement is called I Came by Train. I Came by Train. But why it's interesting is it has train operating companies, rail companies, ticketing companies, last mile providers of bicycles and scooters and taxis and Ubers, all that thing, all connected together. But also football teams. They have a deal with Real Betis, I think, in Spain, and the Premier League in the UK. And also live events like Glastonbury Music Festival.
Yeah.
They're trying to bring the whole thing together into a vision that they will achieve minus 30% car journeys by 2035, because they'll move them from cars onto rails. By the way, the rail system in the UK is bad. It's going to be a big problem. But the vision of a different world and a collective approach to doing it and the systems thinking that's organizing that approach, to me, is a really nice example of what comes next.
Absolutely. So two tips that I've heard from your example. So one of them could be like putting nature back at the center and like reading its carbon book. And the second one is like addressing challenges or opportunities from us with a systemic perspective. So it's not only like a multi-stakeholder perspective, because challenges are complex and they do require this. One question that it's a bit of a change of topic, and I'm sorry for that, but I really liked to go what have been shared in the chat. One of them says that we've talked about how more money is spent reporting than it actually is spent in true sustainability action. So the question that Brian shares with us is like, how do we change this? How do you think a sustainability director can manage not only the reporting agenda, but also the money?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And that is the question that we are, so thank you for that question. That's the question we're also wrestling with at the moment. And in fact, we are running a business roundtable breakfast next Wednesday, where rather than just talking about the problems, we've asked a collection of next generation sustainability leaders. And by that, I mean people who I think will be driving the agenda forward in the sector in the next 10, 20 years, to come and talk about how we go about doing that. So I probably have more questions and answers at this stage, and I think it's hard. I don't think that anyone really is measuring the volume of effective sustainability innovation inside a company. Where's the KPI? CSRD, EY and PwC and KPMG and all those organizations haven't organized that to be one of the key metrics, really. Similarly, how many experiments have you run? Just experiments running. You don't even have to succeed. I mean, of course you need to succeed, but we also need to allow for failure. Just as we did in technology, we allowed for failure in technology because we were learning and sharing our learning. And of course, because of greenwash concerns, that isn't happening now. But how many experiments are being run significantly? To what extent I think so in a funny way, measurement might be the solution if one could broaden out what was being tracked. I never thought I would say that, actually, but in a way it's come to my mind in this conversation today that is one of the factors. There's also a huge amount of work to do in just creating fluency. I often find, I don't know if you do this on LinkedIn, it's just one example, but it's an analogy for you. It's very easy on LinkedIn to just be friends with people like you, who share your views, who post the stuff that you know about, that comment on your pieces, and you comment on their pieces, and it's great. And frankly, I love it. But I really enjoy actually much more trying to identify adjacent people that aren't from my world, who have almost no connection with me, where we can talk. And when that happens, you get an amazing confluence of ideas that's much more interesting. It's a bit like actually in nature, you see that at the edges of where two ecosystems meet, an example is like Central America and South America and Costa Rica. At the edge of two ecosystems, you get much more fertility, much more diversity of life. And the same really is true about sustainability professionals in the organization. What would happen if the sustainability person and the R&D lead spent time reverse mentoring each other for 6 months, for example? Thanks for the thumbs up. I like it. If they could spend time together.
Yes, absolutely. There's this sentence in Spanish that I really like. It says, encuentros improbables para sucesos impensados, which means like unlikely encounters for unthought results. So it takes me to what you're sharing. Like it's like maybe innovation happens or can happen when two things that might not necessarily be obviously connected get together with each other. But like if we're looking for like sustainable innovation, then that's what you were just highlighting, right? Like the fact that, so maybe it's not such a bad idea that innovation people don't know what sustainability keywords are and sustainability experts. So it's not us having them to actually know how to talk to each other, but it's creating the context for that to happen. And I think the context for that to happen within companies has to do with allowing, first of all, budget to be directed to projects that might fail or might not. So I think that's a little bit tricky, because it's like, how do you, let's go back to the role, right, of the sustainability champion. How that's a struggle, but because like you have many things on your platter. One of them, a pain point we've shared, is that they need to ask for money. They might not have the budget, but they also need to talk with, let's say, the C-level or like other companies, departments within the company to actually get buy-in. So they need to get both things. From this short reflection, what do you think is like the biggest pain that a sustainability champion feels, and how would you recommend that pain is addressed?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I think this might not be fair. So hear me out and then kill me in comments after. I don't think that sustainability people tend to be extremely well versed or experienced in the expression of or the communication of an inspiring vision of the future. I used to work in advertising, and we would go and pitch companies all the time. And we would go and pitch them and say, we'd kind of tell them that they were beautiful, really, right? We would say, I know you're not doing as well as you would like to do, or you'd like to grow more, or you'd like to get more customers, or you'd like to launch these products, la da 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 da. We can make you beautiful. We can make you fall in love with yourselves. We can give you a vision of the world that you could be in that was inspiring. And we would do it, and they would cry, man. And we would do meetings where clients would cry. Grown adults would cry in meetings, seeing a video about how their company could be amazing in the future. The mindset of the sustainability professional tends not to go that way. Tends to be more, what we're currently doing is broken. We need to fix it and do what we possibly can. We have limited time, limited budget, limited resources. I'm going to work where I can, make a difference. And those differences are important, like changing out the heating and the power supply for buildings, all the things that take up everyone's time in the reverse, up the supply chain. But I think if we were able to create more fertile soil in the first place with the C-suite, if we were able to make the soil ready to accept the seeds you want to plant with a more exciting and inspiring vision of an alternative future, we might get somewhere. And again, that's an example, I think, of where the people who are best in the world at pitching are doing the wrong job, typically, because they're selling rubbish through advertising. And the people who have the agenda don't have the ability to pitch effectively in that way. Now, of course, that's not true. If you can pitch to get your measurement budget signed off, which is what people are sort of minimum, right? That's already a start point. But how could you learn to bring that vision to life in a way that was a carrot rather than a stick? That I think is a big part of. I don't know if that answers your question, Sophia, but it sort of strikes me as a crucial fundamental of what the world, how the world needs to change.
I see where you're going, and I think it's actually a little bit connected to the last question that we're going to choose today, because I've got plenty, but we do have 5 minutes left. So there's this question from Natalia, which I think connects to what you were just saying. And she was sharing, like, what do you think are the skills that people should address or develop? People from other backgrounds. Like, so what are the skills that people from other backgrounds should develop in order to work towards this regeneration or true sustainability that we've been talking about?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think so. And it's a nice flip, because everyone always asks the question the other way around. They'll say, what should sustainability people be learning?
Exactly. I
think the skills I would encourage, and these may not be quite what you'd expect, but one would be curiosity, like being prepared to explore. What I found I was not a sustainability engineer by background or an environmental scientist. I've been learning for 3 or 4 years every day. And it's been the most amazing journey, like the most amazing learning journey for me as a person. And I'm sure you've all been on that journey. It's very rewarding to have that curiosity and satisfy it. And it's not like the information is hard to find. It's everywhere. So how do you inspire curiosity about how the world really is and what needs to happen? Like a love of geography, a love of science, and understanding, and beginning to get some understanding of how the natural world works or how chemistry works. These things are all available, and they're often explained in very simple ways too, if you find the right source. So how do we encourage that curiosity? How do we encourage, I think there's a real reason people don't develop their curiosity, which is it's just too painful, too complicated, and too horrible to think about. I'll just get on and book my holiday and forget about it, right? So how do you help people confront that reality and come to terms with it? I think in some ways that's about inspiring courage in people. These are not like hard skills in a way, but they are the most important things, like the courage to actually, how do you give people the chance and the opportunity to look at it in the face and not be scared to think about it? How do we encourage them to explore it and to accept what's happening? I think there's the skill of imagination, and it sounds crazy, but the ability to imagine what the world's about to become like. To me, it's very obvious because I spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I'm not sure other people do. So how do we encourage that as a you know, in a safeguarded, safe space where they can explore what that might feel like. I think that's really important as a skill. What else am I going to think about? I think the desire to collapse. I mean, we've not. I spent grew up in my career where competition was the number one driving energy in so many cases. You know, it was we call it sharp elbows in the UK. You know, sharp elbows in business to kind of get ahead of the next company, and that's completely the wrong skill set for what comes next, which is incredible, intense collaboration and co-creation. And who here has really been trained in really understands how to do systems thinking as a thing in your daily life? It's really hard. It seems like very messy diagrams to most people. And how do you actually build how do you really build a collective or a consortium of people that really will do stuff rather than just talk the whole time? And those are the, if I could inspire my children, I have too many children, but if I could inspire my kids, my 3 children to be more like that, then I think that would set them up better for what comes next. And that must be true, therefore, of every function and discipline and role in a commercial or organizational world.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Leo. Natalia, I hope your question has been solved, but I do wanna say here that question to me resonates a lot. One of the reasons that we created Skills for Impact is actually to understand what are the skills gaps that are required and how can we actually provide learning experiences so people can actually achieve and develop those skills. So before we actually conclude this meeting, I would like to share something about that. And also then just coming to an end, Leo, just so you can prepare your last 3 tips. So like very short answer on like what are the 3 call to actions or like ideas that you would suggest. But before we get into that, I would like to share a little bit about what Natalia kind of offered. So again, as I was saying, I'm very deeply touched on a personal level about like what are those key skills that people should be developing. And this is something that is rooted in what we're trying to do at Skills for Impact. So as I'm looking at my screen now and I'm reading our company purpose statement, which is like evolving together to build this sustainable and restorative future, right? And we've done lots of studies to understand what are those skill sets that are required. And there are many that are instrumental. There are some technical transformative skills. Some of them are like inner development skills. So what I'm sharing right now in the screen is one of the courses that we've actually created based on a lot of research that we've done to understand what are some of the basic foundations and skill set that anyone working in a company should develop to actually build leadership towards that sustainability transformation. So we do have created this offering. Natalia, I'm happy to share with you all the information and with everyone on this talk. But that's a little bit what we do, right? We're here to actually understand what are the top skills required, and we bring together an expert network and a methodology that is skills first, meaning that we put actionable knowledge all together to actually address this challenge, which is the challenge of the closing the gap between the skills that are required and that we have to develop. We have a co-founding partner, which is a consultancy specialized in corporate sustainability. And we also have an academic partner that brings a lot of expertise in terms of how to create these transformative educational experiences. So a little bit of this is what we also do at Skills for Impact. This is just one of the many samples that we have. We also have a lot of solutions-based courses that we're developing. So everyone that would like to know a little bit of that, we're going to be sending some information over. Thank you for that. Leo, just one last closing minute. Can you share with us 3 recommendations and concrete actions for anyone that would like to take a step forward towards true sustainability?
Thank you. So I've got 3 for you that I think are important, some of which we've mentioned. But the first one is, I think, find a co-conspirator, by which I mean find someone else in a different discipline in the organization that cares and is prepared to put some money and time behind the project that you have. So do it together. That's the first one. Find a co-conspirator. The second one is run a pilot or do some experimentation. Like experiments don't feel as threatening to the organization, but you can get good data that gives you credible stories to tell. So run experiments. The third one, I think, is do the futures work. Spend some time looking ahead 10 years. Take a step back from the day-to-day. Do a project on the futures and then it helped you really see a different way forward, which is an exciting one. And finally, and I will mention this, please get in contact with me. I'd love to hear from you guys, and you can reach me on LinkedIn, for example. But we will be publishing an open source playbook about thinking about a framework for how do you drive more innovation into your role if you're in sustainability. We've got really smart people contributing to that. We'll convene it, and then we will share it. So if you want to be access to that, please just drop me a line, and we'll get in touch. That'll be available sometime after next week. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for according me the time to talk to your team and everybody on the call. I appreciate you've taken time out of your busy days, and Sophia, thank you for lining it all up and organizing it. It's been an honor to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo. Thank you. The honor was truly mine, on not only today, but also as we prepare this conversation. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll be more than happy to also send over this invite that you generously shared, Leo. So thank you very, very much, and I'm looking forward to our next talk.
Be in touch soon. Thanks,
Have a
guys.
good. Bye-bye.
Bye.